All right, we are going to call this meeting to order. You get roll call, please.
Stanislaus County Representative. Here. City of Ceres Representative.
Here.
City of Houston Representative. City of Modesto Representative. City of Newman Representative.
Here.
City of Oakdale Representative. City of Patterson Representative. City of Riverbank Representative Chair.
Here.
City of Turlock Representative.
Here.
City of Waterford Representative. For the record, please.
Here.
Thank
Sorry.
you. It's okay. And then we have, I'm sorry, I skipped City of Riverbank Representative because we have the chair who's also from Riverbank. My apologies, City of Riverbank Representative.
Here.
And then Environmental Justice Representative and LAFCO Representative. Here. All right, Mrs. Chair, you have a quorum.
Well, perfect. I am going to go to public comment. Is there any members of the public that wish to speak? Or any online? All right, we have our consent calendar, motion to approve the Valley Vision Stanislaus Steering Committee meeting minutes of November 20th, 2025. Their motion or discussion. Motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
LAFCO will second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
In general, yes. Any
Aye.
opposed? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
We have a discussion item. Oh, thank you for doing that. Let each other down. We have a discussion item, motion to recommend the policy board approve by resolution the 2026 Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. Preferred scenario C, mixed use with jobs and with jobs focus.
Me,
And we will have Nixon Cook.
I'm on the Stan RTA board.
Oh, this is not Stan RT. We're outside town.
I'm lost.
Yeah. It's okay.
Sorry, Chair.
I've been lost before.
Okay, come this way. Jim, go ahead.
We'll take a quick pause for the record if we can know who is in attendance now. We'll take a quick pause.
Whoa. I'm in a meeting.
So we had a couple folks join us.
All right.
I saw Modesto and
Houston.
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 Great. Thank you so much.
EJ Rep Garibay.
For each of
You.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to move forward to discussion item A.
Hello, everybody. This is Nick St. Cook, Associate Planner at StanCog. For this first item, I'll be handing it over to our Kimley Horn team, who's been working with us on preparing the RTP SCS, and Michael Schmidt can take it from here.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Hernandez and committee. So these are the major topics we're going to cover this afternoon. So we're going to start off by talking about scenario development. So it builds on our prior conversations about themes. Today, we're going to make a recommendation, hopefully for a specific scenario for the RTP. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Then we're going to talk again about the SCS support program. So again, these are those three focuses where we're looking at bikes, bicycles, middle housing, and VMT, and we'll talk a little bit about updates on those. I'll provide an update on the public outreach, and we'll talk about the next steps. So scenario developments. So just as a reminder, these are the kind of the numbers that kind of back up our scenario. So we went through this process first with the University of Pacific to essentially the demographer there came on board and helped us figure out what the future held in terms of the number of households, the population, and the employment. And so these are the numbers that we started that work with. So that we have a 25-year growth horizon. So if your eye kind of navigates down to the corner, that's really the numbers that really matter for us, because that's our job, is to basically figure out where do we anticipate, or what's the scenario where we want anticipate where jobs and housing is going to be located into the future. And you'll just remember this graphic as well, kind of thing. And this kind of on the left shows you this part of that process was we broke down with each community how much growth there would be in households, population, and employment. And that's that table there. And that was, that was in part carried out by the University Pacific. And then there was an effort to meet with each one of the cities, discuss it, and then kind of normalize it across it, because we do have a control total, like total amount of growth that we're kind of allotted by the state. We kind of stay within 1.5% of the State Department of Finance's forecast. And you'll see just graphically on the right, it kind of shows you where that household growth was kind of anticipated. And it's primarily in the more developed areas of the community. So just a little bit of a reminder on, the reality of growth, we kind of call it. But, I kind of, if your eye kind of goes over to the right kind of thing, just kind of make that point. You see those little slivers on top of those green bars. That kind of shows you the idea is the green stuff is already in the ground. So that's stuff that is kind of the immovable objects. Like we've already predetermined, some folks live in different places and we already have jobs in some places. So this small piece on the top is the part that we then get to vision where we want that to go into the future. And that's really what drives the scenario development. And that's a key part of the regional transportation plan, is there's a recognition that, land use drives transportation and also drives transportation needs. So, as part of this, part of when we're thinking about this scenario is we know there's some things it has to achieve. And one of those things is it has to result in air quality conformity. That's obviously an important consideration. Federal government kind of mandates that we continue to meet that. And then SB 375, which is the state's sustainable community strategy, that comes down to those greenhouse gas emissions. So we got to be very careful as we're planning for the future that we're going to achieve those goals. And as a reminder, they've set targets for every MPO across the state, which basically says we start in 2005 as a benchmark, and then we go out to 2020, and then subsequently out to 2035, and we got to have a per capita reduction. So for Stancog, that reduction is 16% per person, basically out from between 2005 and 2035. So those are just things we have to keep in mind as we're developing our scenarios, that those are two things that are expected as a result of our efforts. And, again, obviously we only have future choices to meet these targets. So it puts a little bit of pressure on how we develop this work, obviously. So you'll just remember just the overall process. We started with 2022. We always start with what we did last time, and that's kind of called the business as usual case. So we assume the question is, well, do we want to continue to maintain the current planning strategy? And we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. We brought that one forward, and then we had a couple of themes. And remember, the themes were just kind of extreme versions of the future, and that was to kind of test the sensitivity of this limited amount of growth where we allocated. And subsequent to that, we actually developed 4 scenarios. Scenario A, again, is our business as usual case. And today, the hope is that we'll coalesce around a recommended scenario, and that scenario will kind of be the underpinning, really from a land use standpoint, in the regional transportation plan that we'll finalize. And I do want to make a point about that. It's just as a reminder, we do this every 4 years, so this isn't like the final word on it almost. So every 4 years, we have an opportunity to kind of revisit this and make sure that the assumptions we built in last time are the right ones. And so this isn't the last word. It doesn't mean 2049 is exactly going to turn out like this. So part of how we do that is we develop there's two kind of models we always deal with. There's a land use model and a transportation model. And so we're really kind of focused on that land use part of it. So the Stancog changed the way it was doing it. We really kind of did an update to their approach. We're now using a product called Urban Footprint. It's used by many agencies across the state and elsewhere kind of thing. And it's a comprehensive GIS tool that basically lets us visualize existing conditions and then try different things. So imagine it's kind of like painting, where I'll paint different locations for housing and employment and test those. And from that, we're able to find out, what are the general impacts to air quality? What are the transportation needs? How does it affect public housing and housing opportunity? And that's kind of to inform us, because, even though the RTP, in some ways is primarily the outcome we think of is a transportation document that kind of shows the roadmap for what we're going to construct into the next 20 years. There are many different goals we're trying to achieve. And so this kind of contextualizes our choices and helps us understand, how are we affecting health? Good choices with active transportation, for instance, will obviously increase activity and reduce those kind of things. So and this models it at the parcel level. So it's a painting thing. And I'll make the point again, too. I want to make a point about just generally about where scenario analysis is. This isn't deterministic. It doesn't mean, sometimes people look at it, look at the work we do, and they're concerned, well, you painted a duplex in this parcel, and I don't think that's where it should be, kind of thing. And that's not really the kind of deterministic outcomes we're talking about. We're talking about a scenario which just basically paints a reasonable idea of what we want to coalesce around. It doesn't say any specific exact parcel or piece of land is going to develop a certain way. It's more of these like general statements that should influence other policy choices. So we had some guiding principles that we used to influence that actual scenario development, building on the feedback we got from the group on themes as well. And, again, we want to ensure a jobs housing balance. And so that's just really kind of saying that we want to have employment for folks who live in Stanislaus County. We want to have employment for them in Stanislaus counties to the extent we can accommodate that. We also want to focus growth in low VMT areas. So that's areas where you have access to shopping and schools and the services you need. We want to increase access to opportunity, and that's kind of an environmental justice consideration, and make sure that we're putting folks where they have the equal opportunity to be successful. We want to preserve farmland. That's a key one that we're always cognizant of, is like as we make scenarios, as we develop new projects, they often impact farmland, and that's obviously a significant concern for the community. And then obviously growing in infill areas kind of builds on the low VMT areas. So with that, I think this was included in the thing, but just to give you a sense of, like, we basically break these 4 scenarios, and there's the business as usual. We call the second one, call it B, mixed use with transit connections. C is mixed use with jobs focus. And then the fourth one we kind of called increased ADUs. And so each one of them has a land use element to it, a transit element, a bike and ped element, and a major roadway investment element. And I'll say kind of we're starting at the bottom, and maybe for a moment just to comment on that. All of them maintain the same roadway infrastructure. So plans around major infrastructure as we've received it from the cities, those are all kind of reflected as a constant across all of them. And so it also reflects all of the efforts in Measure L as the voter initiative was passed. And so those are maintained. The differences are really amongst the top 3 buckets. And so I will say that all of them honor the same control total. So I showed you that growth. So whatever the growth was in Turlock or Newman or Ceres, that's maintained. It's just distributed slightly differently within that community based on these themes. So the first one, if I just kind of go across, it's the same middle housing theme that we had last time, really with some in undeveloped areas. The second one is really the most aggressive theme, if you want to think about it. It's really starting to talk about vertical development near transit. So it's a bigger use of transit. The third one, C, is kind of this idea we're going to move development housing a little closer to existing job centers. So we kind of said, okay, well, let's look at vacant areas near existing transit areas. And then the fourth one is kind of this building on scenario A, but saying, what if we just put a lot of ADUs out there? So a lot of those, accessory dwelling units, it's the backyard, second house kind of idea. And so the first one, it's again, business as usual. So when we look at BRT and the bike plan, it maintains exactly what the policy board approved last time as our approach. So it has a single BRT route. The second one, again, is staying with the idea of this mixed use, kind of starting to look at vertical type apartment housing a little more than we would maybe have in the past. It has plans for 5 BRT routes. And then a focus on those bike connections to kind of connect me to those transit opportunities. The third one really has just a little more BRT. There is an ongoing BRT planning effort going on concurrent to what we're doing. So Stan RTA is kind of grappling both with their short range bus plans and their longer range ones. And so this would be more of what we're calling 3 routes. So it's more than we did last time, but not as extreme as maybe B is being. And then the increased ADUs, that just maintains the one route that was identified last time. So kind of if you think about it, the transit and bike and ped investments, those are just really meant to support those major land use strategies. So they're in response to that. So, and we'll kind of get into comparing them against the business as usual case. So this kind of starts to get at some of the numbers. So we start, and you can kind of, your eye looks down to the bottom, you can kind of see there's that red dotting kind of thing. And that kind of tells you where we painted stuff. And again, that doesn't intended to mean any single parcel is necessarily for sure going to be developed, but it means we're kind of putting things where we said where we're going to do them. So the business as usual case, again, that represents what we said last time was our vision for 2046. Now we're looking out to 2049. So we took the same vision and just implemented it through 2049. And you can see with each one of them, we've got different amounts of 15 plus multifamily housing growth, how much in that unit we're going to have. You've got an amount of acreage of farmland that's consumed, an estimate of the units per acre of the growth, and then just basically how much we've got at different densities. And kind of if you just kind of look across that, you can see that that we've got 45% of it is what we're calling multifamily growth. And I want to make an important point that when we talk about multifamily, that's probably more duplexes and triplexes than anything else. We're not really talking about this one was about middle housing. So it really isn't about when we say multifamily, we're really not talking about complex apartment buildings. And then 55% was going to be a single family residential. So if we're kind of looking at mixed use with job focus, kind of basically it's again a variation where we've now repainting. So if you kind of let your eye look down, you can see we've kind of painted more red in areas that are closer to employment centers. And then we've tested that, and then we've included those 3 conceptual BRT locations and a slightly different bike network. And we've really still got a lot of the middle housing, an increase over the base case, and a little bit less single family. And you can see as that kind of plays out, and you can see also at the top, we've got information about, where along corridors and where the locations are. And those really just kind of describe that thematic thing below, but you can kind of see that they kind of reveal different densities. So really kind of mixed use is a different representation of that one. So the next one I'm showing you is scenario 3 against the base case kind of thing. And again, just kind of letting your eye navigate over on it kind of thing. And this one is less aggressive. If you kind of let your eye go over, it's less aggressive it's got 60% of multifamily growth. So it's more, we're talking about more middle housing than we planned for last time. We're talking about an increase in that and a reduction in single family. That's kind of the key stuff. And then we're talking about, again, locating it slightly different. If you look at the painting, this is more in the employment centers. The prior one was more located a little more to transit opportunities, and this one's a little more located that. This one has quite a bit less farmland consumed is one of the interesting things about C. So C, you can see there's a big reduction in what we would have done last time. So about half as much farmland. So again, we're kind of encroaching on less farmland. So I gotta click the thing the other way. And finally, the last one is just this ADU one. And I think this one revealed kind of a surprise for us, kind of that, when we really kind of looked at, because really it's hard to put ADUs in areas where we have less land. So we ended up putting ADUs on kind of moving more of them out to kind of newer development that was further out. And so kind of even with the ADU theme, kind of ended up consuming more farmland. So that was kind of one of the things we noticed about that approach that just was less attractive about it, that it started to have a greater impact on that, which wasn't a desired outcome. But this one kind of maintained more of a 50% growth maximum. So a little bit, if I look at the business as usual case, a slightly different development pattern, more close to the business as usual case. So that brings us to the kind of summary table, and this kind of just puts everything side by side, and it kind of lead us up to a staff recommendation for what we think should be perhaps carried forward for the completion of the RTP. And you can kind of see, just looking across the top, you can kind of see, if scenario A again is our business as usual case, what we approved last time. If I kind of look at farmland, you can see that D actually kind of takes us in the wrong direction with that. B and C both use less farmland. That's kind of an important thing. B and C both have more of that transit element in them and are a little more concentrated within existing urbanized areas. You can see that the residential densities go up under B quite a bit for the growth component kind of thing. Definitely go up as well for the scenario C, or I'm sorry, go down compared to scenario A, and then scenario D is actually very low. And then there's differences in terms of the number of units. You can see 39% scenario B with the 15 plus multi-family units, a slight increase on scenario C kind of. So we've got a few more apartment complexes in C and far less in scenario D. And then if you just kind of look at the growth at units per acre, 20%, it's A was the greatest, B exceeds that even more so. C is a little bit less, and then D is the less. Again, D is this kind of a little bit sprawly is what we kind of found as we tried to implement it. And then the last two kind of just show that multifamily to single family ratio, kind of gives you that sense of, again, the multifamily really kind of intended to be
Excuse me,
more
can
than
you speak closer to the mic for those online?
Oh, I'm sorry. Better? Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you. The multifamily and single family distribution. So a lot to take in there kind of thing. So, want to make one other kind of key point. So, I kind of started out by saying, these scenarios have to do a lot of things. And one of the things they all have to do is they have to meet conformity. We cannot put a scenario forward that doesn't meet conformity for the RTP that will not be accepted by the federal government. We've also got this secondary process, which is the state's sustainable community strategy, where they're going to want to talk about the land use patterns and the growth and some of the assumptions we make. And that's that greenhouse gas reduction. And right now we're still working through a process to figure out exactly how that's going to be calculated. That the CARB and the EPA are working that out exactly. So we're giving you, when we show you the change on greenhouse gases, the purpose of that is to tell you how much it would change over the base case. So all three, B, C, and D, will improve greenhouse gas conditions, which is important because that's a challenging metric for the region to meet. D actually has the greatest influence on that. Interestingly, it has the lowest vehicle miles traveled, even though it consumes the most farmland. C kind of is this middle ground. It reduces greenhouse gases by an estimated 1.2%, and B more than a 1% more. So I think in confidence we can say we expect that all of these scenarios are the last one will meet conformity, and the three new scenarios will meet the conformity, which is a key element. And there's an expectation that we think we'll be able to find a sustainable community strategy that CARB will meet, except based on these numbers. So a lot of information. I apologize. It's complicated and there's a lot of data. I just kind of thrown at you. So I realize it's not on the. We'll come to a moment with questions, but I do want to just kind of lead to, based on all of that, in consultation with StanCog staff, the recommendation is C. So that's really that kind of like, we're going to add some more BRT routes, so we're going to go from 1 to 3 routes, not the extreme version of 5. We're going to hopefully reduce the greenhouse gas consumption, or not greenhouse gas, the farmland consumption by more than 50% by picking that. There is an increase in middle housing. That's kind of a key change from over the prior one. Middle housing was a key component of our prior RTP. We're kind of saying we're going to lean into that a little bit by having more of that. So we went from 50-50 to, or 45-55 or 45-55 to 60-40, so a 15% increase in middle housing. And that's probably in part a recognition too of just the housing affordability challenges continue to be worse. And then, it's like it's got the highest scenario where locations in job-rich environments. So again, that theme of coming back to us trying to find that jobs housing balance. So responding to what we said we wanted to achieve through these scenarios. Again, it's got 2 more BRT routes than, like I said, it's got fewer than B, so we're not quite going as far. And I think part of the concerns around B is that it's probably a little bit infeasible when we start looking at it practically. Can we really construct this many BRT routes in the timeline? And do we have the money to even do that? The bike and ped investments focus on regional connectivity. Later in the presentation, Daryl Lapontier from our team is going to talk about that. There's been a lot of work done with the cities and the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee to sort out what that's going to look like. And then, just an overall scenario to see aligns well with housing and employment. It improves mobility options. It preserves farmland, further reduces our VMT. And I think it's intended to hopefully be realistic rather than aspirational. That's a key thing that we're trying to achieve, recognizing that always these scenarios are a little bit of a stretch. I mean, it's obviously we're talking about changes in the way we're doing things today over the next, years through 2049. So I'll pause there. I'd assume there's a opportunity for discussion and there's a motion, but I'll let the staff handle that.
All right. Are there any questions?
Quite a few. If you don't mind me asking. Thank you for putting all that together. I appreciate all the work that has been put in. I'm a little concerned in terms not the models, but really how sorry, let me rephrase. How the model takes into consideration, and maybe as some jurisdictions are working through their land use general plans, and how the modeling takes in. I don't know if that takes into account as we're looking at some of the jurisdictions looking at, increasing their sphere of influence and how that works in terms of development and zoning, and how that relates to the model itself in achieving the particular targets. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenging exercise. I'm just going to like to put that out there because we're a little bit, we're trying to anticipate what is possible in the future kind of thing, and recognizing that, the general plans we may have today may change over the course of this. And this is a little bit of an effort where we're kind of trying to use the existing general plans for some of that guidance. We're trying to use the vacant parcels for some of that guidance, undeveloped areas, and any existing plans. There's also a recognition that this is intended to be an exercise where there's a little bit of a stretch, perhaps, or a little bit of coalescing around a theme that the region kind of goes to. So we're not necessarily looking at every single parcel and saying, who's developed here, who's looked at this, exactly, what the connections are there. But those are all things that play into the alignment of those scenarios. And so it's not, if you're asking me, is this a perfect representation of every single general plan and every single land use and zoning thing? It's not, for sure.
No, well, yeah.
Yeah.
I understand that. So I just had some concerns around that. And then you had mentioned previously that urban footprint looks at air quality emission, transportation, public health, and housing. What about any unintended consequences or extreme? Does the model look at any of these fluctuations or different other things that may come into play?
So that's a great question. I'm not sure if you're alluding to climate change or other influences. So it's worth kind of pointing out like this, like the when we do the land use model, it kind of kicks out some kind of more planning level information. And then we put it, and that's how we help assess it. So we kind of take a time out and we look at that, and it's informational, but it's not the final word. The final word is we load all of our land use information into the travel demand model. And so a different model gets run. The data comes out of that. It then goes in the air quality model. And then we apply a bunch of other statistics to it, and then we get the final result. So the early stages when we're using the land use model, we're using that to kind of locate stuff and make sure it's reasonable, plausible, that it makes sense, trying to take and contextualize the things that you talked about, which is where's available land, where the sphere of influences have, what do the general plans have kind of thing. But it still goes through these additional processes. And then that's how we get those resultant numbers that we say, here are our estimates. So it's a little bit of a long process. And that first part like helps us make sure that we're considering the other goals, because the RTP has a long string of goals that some are related to environmental justice, some are related to health, some of them are related to fiscal constraint. So like we're trying to like balance a lot of different things all at once as we develop these scenarios.
Right. And I think I had one more question in terms of what you just mentioned, how within the 5 principles, particularly the access to opportunities or the environmental justice aspect, how are those taken into consideration within the model when you're looking at the VMT reduction? In again, I know it's not a perfect model, but when you're looking at the corridors or at the job centers or where housing could potentially be.
Great question. So what it really, the model looks at is kind of two things. It looks at distance, which is really proximity to opportunity. So services like, am I close to a school? Am I close to shopping? And then we look at the number of trips. So, low income actually tend to make less trips. There's a little bit of, the effect when I have higher discretionary income, I tend to make more vehicular trips than when I don't. And I also tend, when I'm lower income, I tend to respond more to transit, active transportation opportunities to replace trips that I would have otherwise made in a vehicle. It's an economics, a matter of economics. So, when we're locating the travel demand model has, which is the next part of that, and as well, the housing model have some elements of that where they're testing for that and adjusting for that. And they do factor in things like income. They kind of try to when we're trying to paint this stuff, the type of development we're putting in does factor in, has a socioeconomic characteristic to it to kind of show an effect. But really, we kind of get at what you're asking about by when we're painting, by putting things in proximity to things, we're kind of meeting some of those needs as the intent, and we're looking into where the need is for housing is. So there's a little bit of an informational part because it's obviously worth pointing out that, one of StanCog's responsibilities as well is the regional housing needs assessment. So that does factor into some of this thinking.
And then the last question about the methodology, about how you came about with, see, besides the numbers, what was the process or the methodology in working with staff, but then also you had we obviously the BBS input, but then also the public input.
Yeah, so the public input is ongoing, I will say, so it's, that process is, it's, we don't necessarily ask them, where would you like to see housing per se kind of thing, because it's a little bit, again, this is scenario development. It just, it can't work in that vein. We'd never be able to develop any scenario, but we are asking, what are your priorities, really? And that's kind of what informs these scenarios a little bit. It's like, what's important to you? Are you concerned about the cost of housing? Are you concerned about what type of transportation needs do you have? Where do you live? Some of that information, and that kind of feeds into that, and I think scenario C is consistent with the desire, some of the desires that have been expressed through those interactions, and we've continued to collect information through, different, we've had a couple of formal processes, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, but we've gone to the city councils. We're still going out to some of those, the board next week. We've also had some canvassing done. We've had some pop-ups that we've completed in different locations. There's a website where we've been collecting information, and that, that's all important. It's not necessarily statistically valid data. No, we haven't done a statistically valid sample, but it continues to build on this theme of what we think the data is also telling us about needs. So I think there's some concert that, that Housing affordability is a concern. Transportation is a concern. There is an interest in having, better transit service, that can be made available in active transportation. There's also a strong desire to maintain the improvements in the voter initiative, Measure L, and the other infrastructure improvements.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee?
Thank you. Couple of quick ones and then just a comment. For the reduction in greenhouse gases that you put for each of the scenarios, how much, that's obviously not up to the 16% total. How much of that is needed through the rest of the program? Do we need to choose alternative D or scenario D so that we get that extra 0.4% or anything like that? What's the relationship to the rest of the plan?
So great question. And this is a challenging part of the RTP, just to kind of tell folks how because this gets at the schedule, because there's a little bit of the complexity in how this works is we need to be done with the RTP and it needs to be approved before December, I'm going to say 16th. I don't have the exact date in my head, but basically that requires the federal government reviews it and we have to be done in September. Well, that is at what point CARB comes in September, CARB comes into the conversation. We have a separate process where we have to go through with CARB. So there's a little bit of when we're working through this, the SCS is kind of a separate process, but it builds on the RTP. So we're kind of anticipating that we will come to agreement about methodologies, that we will come to agreement on the outcome of that. But it's important to note that, CARB is the determiner as to whether that's achieved. So this isn't a self-certified situation where StanCog's able to say, we have achieved it, the conversation is over. There's still CARB needs to weigh in and does have input always on methodologies, on assumptions, and it also asks for evidence related to incremental development. So there's a very complex set of analyses they also require. And one of the things that frankly they ask for is show me that you've made incremental improvement towards the things you said you were going to do in your last RTP. So that's part of why some of the planning efforts that are going on right now with StanCog, like the CEZ plan, the bike and ped program, are important programs so that CARB can see that the agencies are serious about trying to achieve what they've put in the plan. So I probably not perfectly answering the question, but I guess it's us anticipating that will be enough based on the other things that are going on and not having the final formulas to do the calculations, that will position us to achieve that. But that final determination will come from CARB. It's at a later date.
So do you believe that all three scenarios are sufficient for us to move forward to meet that CARB goal? Obviously you're chasing a number that doesn't actually exist, but would any of the three scenarios be sufficient, or would scenario A, do you think, not provide enough since it's less than the other two?
No, I think there's the potential that A could be successful as well. To be frank, it's a little bit, there's been some changes. A little bit what happens with each process too is sometimes the state says, well, we've determined that we're handling that part of the calculation now, or where that benefit is a statewide benefit, and now your numbers have been affected by it. So it's a little bit a moving target with each of the RTPs, how the process gets done. So that's why I'm a little evasive, but I'm not trying to be evasive. It's just that until we sit down and work through the exact process with them, it's not a certainty. But I think, if I just go off our prior experience, well, the last plan, we achieved greenhouse gases, assuming we can come up with enough programmatic things, because part of how we get there is we say, hey, we've got an important TDM plan, a transportation demand management plan. We're going to show you how this bus rapid transit thing will reduce it. And we're committing effort to that. And some ITS programs and some other key little programs, then all those little programs kind of add up to getting us to our 16% reduction. But it's its own process, and it is a challenging process for most MPOs, to be blunt.
Thank you. I just wanted to start the discussion as well with staff, if that's all right. Generally, I think Modesto is supportive of item C. Based on what I've seen, it aligns with what we've been talking about a lot in our general plan and what we've heard through our general plan of reduction of farmland that has been converted, reduction of GHG, obviously. and also a strong focus on a balance between jobs and housing. I think making a choice to pick a sort of aggressive but realistic plan, as you outlined, I think is a wise one. So I think generally Modesto is supportive of alternative C.
You, any questions? Yeah, please.
Thank you. I know that's a rabbit hole, but I want to follow up on that. So it's not necessarily intuitive to me that scenario D is the GHG winner. So wanted to ask about that. And also, are there elements that are in that could be included in scenario C that pull that number down?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I will say that like they all at the 50,000 foot level, they maybe take on a flavor like they're kind of like black and white options kind of thing. They definitely have flavors. There's certainly ADU in C, A, B, and C, some level of assumption about it. It's just D is like kind of a more extreme assumption that policies change, incentives are there to really encourage folks to do it kind of thing. I think, you know, I think, so I think some of those underpinnings, like there, I think there's a recognition that ADUs have been a, you know, are of an interest for many folks to consider, you know, for a variety of reasons, you know, age in place or, you know, parent living with them or, you know, a rental unit. So that's, and there's been existing legislation done to facilitate some of that. But I don't think, I guess I would just say the problem with D is, again, is I think was our concern was love the greenhouse gas numbers, but hate the farmland part of it kind of thing. So, but I don't want to lose, I do want to suggest that the other ones do have ADU elements in it kind of thing. I think that I would just say also that I think D had a higher preponderance of single family than C. And I think that raises a little bit of a specter of the affordability question, kind of going back to that. So I think that's part of the reason, like they all work on paper. But like that one, I think we kind of were a little more dismissive of perhaps for those reasons, but some of that, those underpinnings are in the other ones. The themes about ADU are clearly in there. If that helps.
You, anything else? from the committee? Any public comment done online? I'll bring it back for more discussion or any consideration. Is there anyone?
Chair, there is a hand
Okay.
raised now.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I had some kind of just general questions because I'm trying to understand, uh, I guess, for lack of a better term, the margin of error with this modeling software. Like what are the certain types of assumptions that are guiding how this scenario is working out versus this scenario? So you mentioned earlier, like there's a sort of assumption that like people from a low income area would likely make less trips than somebody not in that area. But and I get the points that you were bringing up, but you could make equally compelling points that somebody in a low income area could actually make more trips than somebody not in that area. So I'm just like wondering how those assumptions are grounded, like in that modeling software, um, what the margin of error is, and then how that shows up and manifests in how we're seeing how these different scenarios are playing out. Because like another example is like, how is it that allowing more ADUs is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also taking up more farmland. Like I don't see the connection between policies that are incentivizing ADUs and that taking up more farmland. I don't see how the two are, because by ADUs, I would assume that that's infill development, it seems to me. So would you be able to expand on that a little bit?
Thank you very much.
Should you go to answer? Okay, sure. So on scenario D, I think part of I can understand the counterintuitive thing because we think of ADUs as being kind of an infill activity, but part of the challenge is that they need to happen on a single family lot, and we kind of have an expectation about what the size of that lot would be. And because like existing locations in more urbanized areas have less space to do that, we tended to expect if we were really going to push on this ADU thing, that we were going to probably see more of that occurring in further out. So, it was going to be a little bit more the lots that were a little bit larger to have that second residence on them, not necessarily existing locations. So we kind of had an expectation there was going to be a little bit more of that when we did that. So that kind of had that net effect of it. So that's kind of why the farmland was consumed. And then the proximity thing, it's really a measure of proximity where we kind of painted it out to. I'd have to look a little more closely to kind of directly get into that part of thing, but it just basically the proximity of the locations where we painted that, it kind of had that duality of like reducing greenhouse gases, but also increasing farmland. And so it was kind of the locational kind of outcome of it. So it's kind of an interesting outcome to your point, but it's kind of the painting process. To your question about modeling, that's a really good question, and it's worthy kind of like just kind of making a point. So, these things can feel like black boxes from a distance, for sure, kind of thing. But there is a standard development process. Stancog didn't invent travel demand modeling or land use modeling. And there are requirements for with the basic idea is we build a model that tries to replicate existing conditions. And then we have a statistical analysis we run and we show to Caltrans and others and we say, hey, look, this kind of shows us similar to what happens on the ground. We put the same number of folks that live in it, the same number of jobs, the roadway infrastructure the way we think. And look, it kind of reveals the same traffic volumes that we can go count today. And so then we load in things that are in the future with the understanding that model will then reveal what the future looks like. And really, when we're using models, we're mostly interested in that change, like what the model tells me about change. I don't use it to forecast existing because I can go out and do real counts. So why would I do that? It's really a tool for change. But I do want to make the point that when things like if we're saying, well, low income folks make less trips, well, that's based on the fact that Caltrans went out and did a sophisticated survey where we went and asked thousands of people, well, what is your travel behavior? What is your income? Where do you live? And so this is all built on statistical data sets. Is it perfect? No, because it's a model. Is it a good representation? Absolutely, it's a good representation, and it is tested statistically. Into the future, well, I'm not going to say it's perfect either because we're kind of making assumptions about what folks are going to do, and that's kind of where this theme goes to. So, definitely into the future, is this going to be spot on? No. Is it going to be a reasonable representation of we think what would happen if these areas were developed? Yeah, I think it's a reasonable representation, and it would affect greenhouse gases like we're suggesting.
Thank you. All right, I'll bring you back to the committee.
Would please the chair will make a motion. I will make a motion to recommend that the policy board approve by resolution scenario C, mixed use with jobs focus, as the preferred scenario for the 2026 RTP SCS.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Stanislaus County,
Yes.
City of Ceres,
Yes.
City of Houston,
Yes.
City of Modesto,
Yes.
City of Newman,
Yes.
City of Patterson,
Yes.
City of Riverbank,
Yes.
City of Turlock,
Yes.
City of Waterford,
Yes.
Chair Hernandez,
Yes.
LAFCO representative,
Yes.
and Environmental Justice representative.
Yes.
Yes, Chair, you have a motion passes.
Thank you. Item B, update on sustainable community strategy supportive program. You're going to take this one as well?
Yeah, sorry. Let me jump to it. Just give me a moment to flip my notes so I'm on the right page. Great. So just want to give a couple updates on the supporting programs. And again, it's worth, I kind of made that point, but again, this is that part of the reason these are important programs is because this not only supports our Stancog's mission. But it's also important, frankly, to the discussions we're going to have with CARB next year when they're saying, well, how are you demonstrating that you're trying to fulfill your RTP? So again, the CEZ plan, this is the middle housing focus thing. We've kind of completed these rounds of creating a toolkit. We're now in the process of running a pilot program, which is basically 2 corridors that cover parts of the city and the county, city of Modesto and the county. I just want to give a quick update on that. So, there was a walking tour done a couple of weeks back kind of thing, which covered stops at multiple locations and, was basically starting that assessment of what is feasible in terms of the middle housing program in those areas. And the idea is this is supposed to be a model that other cities could potentially follow, and that this could be a model for future engagement in those cities as well. So it's kind of a test of whether this approach will be successful. Those are just a list of the tour locations. So I think it's probably just worth sharing what was heard from the community, from the CBOs that engaged, from the various stakeholders at that. And I think these are valuable to hear just because I think they're thematic for many places, and these are just kind of general statements. The higher costs and neighborhood concerns slow new housing, so cost continues to be a concern from the development community, not surprisingly. And there's an interest in seeing infrastructure improvements and development incentives to help spur that growth, and that's kind of the development community speaking. The developers, and this is a constant with the development community, is always they hate uncertainty. So, uncertain returns and upgrade costs, plus, obviously regulatory hurdles are still a challenge for them. So, there's still growing concern about that. We've heard too about safety gaps and limited connectivity to roadways and to transportation. It's still, not surprisingly, something folks want to know about. And there's still access, just a general concern about amongst, particularly amongst the CBOs, the community-based organizations that we talked with about, access to food, care, and having well-funded services and infill housing. So just generally some of the themes I think that the RTP is seeking to support, were brought out in some of that conversation. Obviously, they were focused on those pilot areas, but I think they were still valuable input from that. And then just in terms of what's next with that program, there's still ongoing meetings with the city of Modesto and Stanislaus County as we advance those pilots and Stan RTA. And so there's this kind of we're at the same time communicating with Stan RTA about their BRT program. So it's kind of 2 things in motion at the same time. There's going to be another roundtable organized in April to explore more about housing opportunities. And so that we're looking forward to that. And then near term, the vision statement, goals and objectives have been released. There's selected some infill sites to do a deeper dive on, and they're preparing development alternatives. And that includes, and interestingly, there's a part of this where we have an economist who's really kind of getting at this performa stuff. So kind of saying, it's great to put stuff down on paper, but is this really doable? So there's an economist really kind of focusing in on, is this viable? Are these ideas viable ideas? And so hopefully this will be interesting models that, like I said, the other cities can model after, and there can be additional efforts in this vein. Quickly want to give an update on the VMT program. So again, this is the one of the critical focuses of the RTP. Obviously, as I shared with you at the onset, this is correlated directly to greenhouse gases. So, obviously we're paying a lot of attention to it. But one of the things we're really looking at is this lens of CEQA. So CEQA has been a big impediment across the state to development. And so one of the things we're looking at is, well, how does our assumptions play into what type of CEQA problems we would have? And so we're looking at these programmatic things, but I think one of the things that's kind of revealing itself kind of early on is if you kind of let your eye navigate down to the bottom, and those look like a bunch of numbers that are kind of hard to follow, but those basically are the idea. If we build the plan out the way we say we're going to build it out, how much vehicle miles traveled will we exceed our CEQA allowances for? Okay, by kind of thing across the county. And that total VMT per year. So that's the amount of VMT potentially that may need to be mitigated in our CEQA. You can see it's like residential is 1,000 per year across the county, 3,000 for employment. So a total of 4,000. I do want to make the point that those numbers are relatively low. which is an interesting insight already kind of thing. So, is there a huge need for a massive amount of CEQA mitigation around transportation? It doesn't appear so. There's still maybe the need for a program, but this isn't, some communities we look at sometimes this just jumps off the page. It's such a massive CEQA problem. That isn't really what we're seeing. So it's just kind of an interesting thing, and it's kind of a guiding light as we continue to look at alternatives for CEQA mitigation. And again, this is one of the tools that we're developing and we'll be sharing with all the cities is basically a model for you to consider to kind of facilitate or streamline your SB 743, your BMT stuff. And so this is part of the mapping. There's a product that you're going to get at the end of the study that basically is an online easy mapping tool that allows you to look at mitigation strategies and test quickly using travel demand model data, what those impacts are. And this just kind of gives you a flavor. Those colors show you for different locations whether or not they're low VMT today or whether they're high VMT today kind of thing. And red means high. It means if you were to build something new there, you probably have to mitigate. Yellow means it's above the threshold, but probably got to mitigate. And red tells you, or green tells you, you're probably good to go. You can probably develop something there today. And so this is some of those idea of those tools or useful items to make it easier for the development community to develop housing and for staff and others to kind of navigate this kind of complicated issue. And finally, I just want to make the point that we're in the process of looking at a bunch of different solutions. Some of this is important for the CARB SCS process. It's also just trying to we're looking at the RTP and seeing what types of things in there can we really quantify better than has been quantified. So we're looking at a variety of solutions. We're going to bring stuff back in a future meeting to kind of dive into this deeper, but want to make the point that we're kind of looking at the universe of things. So it's not, we don't have one set idea. And so that the other kind of major item, and those were quick updates, is I've got Daryl online and he's going to just provide an update on the non-motorized plan. That's one of those three elements. We're getting closer to conclusion with that. There's been participation from all the city staff on that program. And then we've been going back and forth with the Bicycle Advisory Committee. We've had 3 meetings with them to kind of focus in on that. So without further ado, I'll let Daryl kind of take over from there.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, and apologize, everybody. I'm a little under the weather, so if my voice is rough, I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I just want to give you an update on the non-motorized transportation plan and what we've been up to for the last several months as we've been going through this. So if we want to jump to the next slide. Recently, we've been working on the regional network development. So one of the purposes of this non-motorized plan is to update what STANCOG has already. It's not to replace or fight with what the local agencies and the cities have in their own active transportation plans, and same with the county. It's an attempt to consolidate what's going on in all of those plans and fill in any gaps so that we have a uniform regional system of bicycle and pedestrian facilities that are not impacted too much by municipal boundaries. So we've gone through the process of looking at what that network should look like relative to what's in the current plan and kept things moving forward. So this is what the network looks like in the initial run through our plan. All those pink dots are where we identified there was a center of population or employment or something that we'd want to make sure was connected into that network. And then all those various lines that you can see show what those networks are. So anything that's in black, that's ported directly over from the existing plans that the STANCOG or some of the local agencies already have. And then where you see those blue lines, that's new stuff. So those are connections that maybe aren't accounted for yet in any of the existing plans. And then the yellow are where we have something in multiple plans that isn't necessarily fully consistent. So we have a conflict between different plans there. So those are things that we're trying to get resolved as we move through this process. Thank you for the zoom in. So this map now is looking at that network I just showed you, but instead of looking at it in terms of what they are, it's looking at it in terms of what type of facility do we think we can make there in a way that isn't going to be cost prohibitive and will make the best use of the existing right-of-ways out there. So you'll see the lines are now color-coded According to that legend, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the class 1, 2, 3, 4 bike system, but essentially class 1 bikeways where you see those red lines, that's a completely separated off-road trail that you can ride on, no interaction with vehicles at all. The orange lines where you see class 2, you'll notice there's not very much of that orange line. Those are the facilities that we're trying to avoid. That's basically just a stripe along the side of the road with nothing else there to protect you as a cyclist. So we try to avoid that too much. The green ones are 2B. So when it's a 2B facility, we're still just using striping, but we're making it not just one stripe between the bike lane and traffic. We're adding a bit more space. So it's creating a buffer zone between the bike lane and the traffic lanes so that there's a little bit more freedom for cyclists to move around and have a little bit more distance between them and passing vehicles. And then class 3, those blue ones, those are where we have what we call a shared lane. So bicycles can ride in lane with traffic. It's intended to be for slower speeds, lower volume traffic roadways where cyclists are not necessarily competing with traffic quite as much, but it's giving them a designated space to be where they can have that entitlement to ride in comfort and not have to yield to vehicles necessarily in the same way. And then the last is those purple lines, which is class 4. That's very similar to class 2, except for instead of the buffer being done with striping, it's done with something physical. So there's an actual curb or some kind of an actual physical barrier between the bike lane and the vehicle traffic. So class 4 is a higher level of protection than we get with the 2B. And the reason we choose 4 versus 2B, or what drives that decision, is really the amount of space available. So if we don't have enough space to put in something physical, but we have enough space to make a little bit extra room for those bike lanes, that's what we do there. Then you'll notice all those dots with their own colors. Those are all where we've identified something that we have to deal with in the landscape to make those facilities that we're talking about. So it could be we need some kind of a bridge over a creek, or there's an existing bridge that's not wide enough to accommodate those bike facilities. So it might need either a parallel bridge or some kind of cantilever device built onto the side of an existing bridge, so we don't have to force the bikes to get in with traffic to cross it. There's major intersections where we might need something a little more robust to help them cross. And then there's a variety of other things, railroad tracks, anything that we see as a particularly significant infrastructure barrier that we have to cross. So those are essential for helping us estimate how much it's going to actually cost to build these things. And it's a way to make note of where the complexities are going to come up when any kind of construction would happen. So once we have all that done, now we've gone and estimated how much ridership do we think is going to be on each of those routes. So this is done using some federal research that looked extensively at how much do we get an increase in bicycle use when you build a new facility. It's really based largely on how many people live in close proximity to it, and then some other factors based on how many people are currently biking to work and how many children are currently biking. So we calibrate those as much to local conditions as possible so that we have a fairly good representation and we can be reasonably confident that our results are reasonable. You'll notice that there's 3 columns of data there. So there's high and medium and low. So what those are intended to do is account for the type of facility that we're going to build. So if we're going to do that nice, completely separated bike path, we can take the high estimate because that's a very high quality facility. People are going to feel comfortable letting their kids ride on that. You don't have to be an experienced rider to feel comfortable there. If it's more of the class 4 or one of those facilities where you're still kind of close to traffic, but there's some separation, we can go with the medium, which is assuming that some people are going to not want to deal with that, but a few people would. And then we have the low for when we're doing just those class 2s and 3s, where we're not really making a huge change to the roadway that's going to bring out a lot of extra people, but it'll bring out some. And then that factors into existing ridership estimates and all that to give us a final estimate on how many riders per day that facility will have. One key thing to note is that when facilities are long, especially, we don't expect that all of these riders are going to ride the entire length of this facility each time. So that's just the number of people that will touch it at some point on it over the course of the day. So if you're standing and counting bikes at any one spot, you probably won't actually get to that number. So this is what that map looks like when we took all those little routes we planned. And it's not surprising, but when you see in the central areas of Turlock, Modesto, Ceres, that's where we see the highest potential ridership because we have the most people there. And there's the most number of close places to go. As we move into some of those further out areas and some of those more recreational trails, you see the orange colors where it's a little bit less. And then the red are those more rural corridors where it's a fairly long distance to bike to your destinations. But we know that there, from our community engagement, that there are people that would like to do that. And so we want to make sure that they can. But when it comes to prioritizing, that's definitely going to be one of the factors we look at. So things that we're working on now as we finish up, we're getting to going on the cost estimates. So we've divided all of those projects we were showing into smaller pieces so that they're going to comprise of a whole lot of different projects that are at a right size and scale to be able to go for grants to construct them. And we're doing a prioritization system to help decide which ones should get built first to have the best return on investment as you get that whole system built out. We do have a public website up where people can provide their input. We're just about finished collecting input on the existing phases and what people would like to see included. And within the next few weeks, we're going to be posting these maps that I just showed you up so that we can get feedback on the specifics of the routing and all that we're showing you now for that next phase. We've also been sharing printed flyers and being present at engagement events throughout the county to collect feedback. We have a survey that we've been collecting data on. So we're trying our best to get a good amount of feedback. We would love to get more. So please definitely let everybody you work with know that we're still collecting that input and would love to get it. As Mike mentioned, we've been talking to staff at all the cities to get input as well on how this fits with local priorities and local plans. And we've been making little adjustments to fit with that. And otherwise, that's it. I could show you guys the website if you like, but otherwise we can move into the outreach summary.
If you don't mind, if we could collect these links and send it out in an email together, that would be great. We could move forward to that outreach summary.
Great.
Thank you.
And I should make the point too, as he said, we'll make sure to share everyone out because we're going to post everything you saw because I realize it's like really tiny. You can't really zoom in. We're going to post those maps with like kind of an easy window so you can zoom in and check out exactly what's going on in your community and then really give us that direct feedback. I think today was really just kind of tell you we've gone through this huge process. We've listened to you and we've tried to develop this system that really kind of addresses the regional requirements because if you remember, Stancog's job is really the higher level connections. So that's really what the focus has been. So you can take a look at that and make sure that we're heading in the right path, and there's still time for feedback and direction. So you'll be able to see those little tiny lines. So and I'm gonna have to flip because I can't quite see. So just to summarize, we've been very busy continue to be very busy with outreach, taking a couple different tacks to that. We've been going to every city, or we're scheduled to go to every city in the county and do a brief presentation just to kind of remind folks that this process is going on and to drive participation. We've also, as part of those, when we go to those locations, we've been canvassing those areas. So we've been hitting the library, community centers, or whatever we can. Well, our folks have been there during the course of the day. So try to just to get some organic feedback from folks that we can kind of corner and ask questions from. So we've been doing that as well, a part of that. There's also been to continue to have pop-ups and other activities on the line. The website is up. That continues to be where we're trying to drive folks. There's a survey on it, an interactive map, information on just about everything. So it's intended to be a one-stop shop. It's also intended to be something that we're going to, at the end of the project, some of the stuff that we think is valuable, I think we're going to work, Stancog intends to pull that over. So some of the mapping and stuff like that, so that, I think, for example, we recognize there's some value in being able to continue to provide easy feedback for the next bike plan update or something like that. So there's conversation around how we can continue to make that. So that's that. Like I said, a lot of in-person engagement has been going on as well, kind of thing. This just gives you a list of the different locations and pop-ups just all over the place. You can see, different locations still have stuff going on. And like I said, we're also canvassing when we're in those locations. And we're planning for an in-person workshop at the Valley Improvements Projects office. And I think that brings us to next steps. Just so in terms of the next steps, we continue to update the website. We're going to update it with the mapping and the links that we talked about, so folks can start to give us direct feedback on some of the stuff that's we're producing. We'll take this VVS recommendation to the policy board for a presentation as well on April 15th, and asking them to approve the scenario, which will then inform the final version of the RTP, which will then be released in June. So to June 8th, we're targeting for a release of that. There'll be more to come on that schedule. Continuing to schedule that community outreach as part of the CEZ. Again, with the VMT program, we're making those programs, and we'll be sharing those soon with the cities and kind of trying to engage you to show you how that can be helpful and helpfully streamline some of the work you're doing. And then finally, Daryl's, as you said, we're prioritizing those regional projects, and we'll be sharing those soon. And I apologize, as always, thank you so much for listening to all this. There's a lot of dense information in here, so I appreciate the patience. So thank you.
Mayor Hernandez, I
Thank
have a
you.
couple of questions, if
Yes,
you don't
of
mind.
course.
Just real quick on when you said June 8th, are you talking about the final draft of the RTPSES?
Yes.
And then will there be a public comment period?
Yes, great question. So we're still finalizing the schedule, but just for there's actually a requirement that the EIR is going to come out at the same time. To the environmental impact report is 45 days. The RTP will be a minimum of 55 days, and so we'll be trying to drive input and collecting information, and then there'll be a period of time where we close that, try to respond to those comments, and then take it back to the policy board for approval, and then we'll start that SCS process.
And then just the other question regarding the VMT reduction, the range solutions. It was really quick, so I didn't get a chance to see if there was one of the solutions that you're looking at is microtransit, and then the other one was you had talked quite a bit, and maybe I don't know if this is the right name, the VNT bank.
Yeah.
Or those solutions on the screen? Because it was real quick. So I didn't get a chance.
That's a great question. So interestingly, some of the stuff that we're working on, like the VMT bank question, we're not going to finalize that before in advance of the RTP getting completed. We're gonna carry that through the summer, and a little bit that's in response to just the fact that the contracts, because the state held us up, we started a little bit later. But it's also we're going to use that to inform the SCS, because that's really greenhouse gas stuff. So we will be bringing that back for conversation. Like we certainly don't have, and that's part of why I was trying to show those numbers is we're trying to see, is this really like on the face of it, is it a good solution? Just is there the need for it? And so that's kind of what we're trying to go through a little bit. So we don't want to bring something back and say, you need this program, and it's like not going to really do much for you, or, because there's obviously, a lot of questions around, well, how much is that going to cost? Is it really going to help what we need? So we want to, we're working through that process to try to help bring some of that for you guys to respond back to.
Any other questions from the committee? Any public comment? Yeah, those links would be great. We'll distribute amongst our own council, and if I could ask all of you to distribute amongst your electeds as well, so that they share at least the survey links, because some of this may not make sense outside of this room to some folks. But and I think that's it, right? So do we have a Caltrans? Yep. Any report out from staff? No? Any member reports? All right. This meeting is adjourned. I don't have a next meeting, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all so much for coming out at 2:18.